How you doing? Today is June 17th, and this is the 13th day of 37 Conversations. I made an audible and decided to talk about the whole Aunt Jemima drama for a little bit. That's been hot in the news today. Quaker Oats decided to back off the imagery of Aunt Jemima, and it caused like an uproar. On one side, you had people that were hype about it and really excited, and they said this is long overdue. On the other side of the argument, you had people talking about, well, is the brand going to change? Is the product going to change? All that kind of stuff. And then of course you had those people that just didn't quite grasp the gravity of the Aunt Jemima depiction, right? And I think work was long today. Had a long work day. Also had an interview this evening that I conducted because a news outlet picked up on the 37 Conversations, so they wanted me to do an interview with them. So I've been kind of preparing for that and everything. So I didn't really have my mind around the discussion regarding Aunt Jemima and the Quaker Oats decision to back off of that imagery. So I don't script out the 37 Conversation series. I have a topic, and of course you kind of get some things in your head that you want to talk about and such. But that being said, though, I can speak to that a little bit. So and the point that I'm making about this this debate isn't so much the fact that, oh, well, if you purchase, Aunt Jemima products or Aunt Jemima branded products, I should say, you're racist or this or that or whatever. That's not the point. I'll add this to the series as kind of like an addition to the hateful imagery conversation that I had. This is the 13th conversation now. That may have been 4 conversations or so ago. You have to check it out. I'm not sure which one it was, but basically, in my opinion, and of course, once again, I have to give that disclaimer. Like, I'm not the voice for the Black community. I'm not the voice for people of color and such. But it goes back to this whole issue with Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's and Miss Buttersworth. It all goes back to what in my opinion, is a lack of education. I think it also goes back to just simply a lack of knowledge and somewhat, you don't know what you don't know, right? So, this is something that growing up as a Black person in my family and such, I knew that depiction of Aunt Jemima was, racist. I knew it was, or we were taught to understand that it wasn't very. It didn't depict. It portrayed something that is very harmful and hurtful for a lot of people. And I'll explain explicitly what that is. It's the mammy depiction. The depictions of, Miss Buttersworth, the depictions of, Aunt Jemima, for those who are not familiar, again, because my parents made sure I understood, racism, understood bigotry, understood history, understood our ancestors' history in this country. So the mammy depiction, right, is ultimately, in the Civil War, post-Civil War, all the way through the 60s South, if you will, all the way up until if you've seen the movie The Help age, right? Where you had, Black women, Black men, but in the mammy, depiction, women serving white families, nursing their children, essentially being servants to them. And that was the depiction of Miss Buttersworth. That's the depiction in which Aunt Jemima are depicted. And one thing that people don't really realize too, when they, okay, so cool, fine, someone's going to say, especially let's focus on the Aunt Jemima situation, because that's what is gaining the most notoriety right now. The depiction of Aunt Jemima, before, when that when that caricature, I guess you can say, was first created, was overtly offensive. If you can look it up. It's a black-faced character. It's a black-faced woman. And that, as well as the connotation associated with, being a mammy and all this other stuff, being in servitude and such. That isn't conjure up very good feelings and thoughts for a very large, or for a very specific population of people. And especially the fact that Aunt Jemima originally was in blackface is considerably offensive. Now we can talk about blackface as well, right? So the reason that it's so interesting to me when I see people that are in blackface, don't understand blackface, don't understand how that's offensive. Well, first of all, you should never depict someone else's ethnicity, period. Race, period. Like, I'm not, you just shouldn't do it. I mean, plain and simple. But people don't understand the historical significance of blackface. So back in the day, when people of color, then let's just be more specific here, black people weren't a big part of society or accepted in many aspects of society, whether it's as it relates to blackface, the stage, film, plays, in that respect, as well as there were no black people in government, there were no black people in law enforcement, there were no black people in big business. But specifically as it relates to blackface, white actors would portray black people and they would have blackface, okay? And when they had blackface, they would play on the stereotypes associated with black people. The big lips, so they had big lips and outlines around their mouth. They'd have overly exaggerated big noses, and these minstrel characters were depicted terribly. They were clumsy, and they were very they were always drinking, or they were just shown to play to all the perceived stereotypes of black people, and it really played up and really implanted in people's minds what a black person was, and it really even more so dehumanized people of black heritage. And that's where the issue and the origination from the insulting feel and the revolting feel of blackface. That's where that came from. Blackface originated in the stage, and because again, like I mentioned just now, blacks couldn't be in they weren't actors, they weren't actresses, so they were depicted, however, by white people who blacked their faces, and their characters were always not represented very positively at all. So when you see, I had a conversation, when we had a conversation the other night, I'm not sure which one it was, but I talked about, just racism. I've been talking about racism this entire series, but when I just talked about, I went to the University of Florida, got 3 degrees there. I'm in a fraternity, and when fraternities would have Confederate and Union parties, or they would have just these very overtly racist, just ridiculous gatherings in which they would have some people in blackface thinking representing black people and such. I'll take the Anne Frank route here, thinking that all people are good at heart in some respect, and maybe they just didn't know any better. Maybe they didn't get it. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. But that's for I'm sure y'all to drop in the comments and stuff. But that is it's a continuation of just the lack of education, the lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding how just simply prejudicial and racist some of those depictions are. So, blackface, I'm sure anyone that sees this video has heard of or seen of an individual that's gotten in trouble because they were found in blackface, or this politician was found in blackface, or this individual they took a picture in college and they were in blackface or whatever, not knowing that history behind it. But that's also because we're not taught that history. So, I'm not giving a pass to them. I'm not giving a pass to those individuals who do those types of things. But on the same token, I think, we have to own our part of the mess, as I referred to a book that I read before, owning our part of the mess, and the fact that we're not teaching people any better, right? So as it relates to Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's, Miss Buttersworth, and specifically as it relates to Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben, people don't realize this either, that there was a point in time in which black people, by their white counterparts, were not referred to as Mr. as Miss or Mr. and Miss. So, if there was a mammy or a servant or someone that was in the home that was serving, the family, or they were servers or whatever the case may be, they didn't refer to him as Mr. my name's Chris Johnson, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Chris, whatever the case may be. It was Uncle this, Uncle that. So that further underscores my point about that depiction of what the Uncle Ben's caricature represents, or the Aunt Jemima caricature represents. Now, certainly Miss Buttersworth, is called Miss Buttersworth. So in that respect, that doesn't hold true, but it's still the depiction of that mammy caricature. So that's the reason why, that's it's time, that gets those representations are undone. Aunt Jemima's been Aunt Jemima for something I read in an article today, when, the news came out, for like 130 years. You know what I mean? That's long overdue. I mean, these debates about, I grew up being told that stuff. And listen, maybe I'm a hypocrite. I had a conversation about hypocrisy, contradiction, and ironies. I have Aunt Jemima maple syrup in my cupboard right now. You know what I mean? And maybe that's an element of me being indoctrinated to a society in which hateful imagery and racist imagery is just so pervasive. I'm not trying to rationalize that. Me as a black person purchasing Aunt Jemima products or whatever the case may be, but I'm just giving you the situation and circumstance in its totality, right? So, it's so indoctrinated in our society and it's so prevalent that we've come to accept it. It's not accepting it. That's not the right word. We've come to understand that it's just there. You're forced to just take it, right? And that's why I spoke about when I had the conversation with my father, talking about the situation in which I was arrested, and my dad spoke about the situation in which he's been, one of the situations in which he's been, harassed by the by police and such. I referenced that as well as it relates to hateful imagery. You know what I mean? Like, people, there's nothing to celebrate about a Confederate leader statue. There's nothing to celebrate about the Confederate flag. There's nothing to celebrate about seeing the Confederate flag on clothing or baby, bibs or, fishing poles or on mud flaps on 18-wheelers. There's nothing to celebrate about that. You're celebrating a movement in existence, literally a country that broke away from the United States and, condoned and promoted the sale of human beings as property. So, I'm kind of rambling and going off point right now, but the point that I'm making to you is the overarching theme and message that I'm trying to convey right now is the fact that people are like, their eyes are wide open and they're being so shocked and amazed, like, well, what the hell? Like, it's just a maple syrup. Like, what's the big deal? It's just pancake mix. What's the big deal? Because it's been so normalized and it's been so, I wouldn't say simplified, but it's just been so accepted by the masses. That's the reason why inclusion is important. That's the reason why you need to have people of color, or even people who understand that experience, who have a diversity, equity, and inclusive lens, being a part of all aspects of society, especially as it relates to brands. Y'all may remember that there was, I think it was it Aeropastel or something like that? Please forgive me if it was Aeropastel, but there was some clothing brand like 4 or 5 years ago or something like that, where there was a little black kid wearing a shirt that said monkey on it, and it's like, and it was like for sale, and it's like, wait a second, are they just like that blind? Are they not getting it? Are they not seeing it? That is what happens when you have a lack of inclusion. When you have or you don't have a diversity, equity, or inclusive lens. H&M. It was H&M. Thanks, M. So it was H&M. So, that it begs the question, for instance, in the H&M example right there, how do things, let's not even talk about Aunt Jemima. Aunt Jemima's been around for 130 years. So it's 2020. You know what I'm saying? So, like, that's no surprise that in whatever, what is that? 1870, that there weren't people that were thinking about the best interests of black people, but H&M, 4 or 5 years ago, doing that and representing a brand that they're selling to, and while they're employing people of color, while their customers are people of color, that is why it's so critical to have that inclusive environment in all aspects of society, right? Or, as I mentioned before, a diversity, equity, and inclusive lens. We just had a great conversation last night about white privilege. My friend Jen Yeagley was on here. You don't have to be the darkest person in the room talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. If anyone saw that conversation last night, you would understand like Jen's white. She's German. She's of German background, German heritage. She is white, both of her parents. But you can rest assured that if Jen worked at a H&M or something like that, or a syrup company in which, was trying to name or brand something, Aunt Jemima wouldn't be the caricature that they would utilize. And, they wouldn't have a black boy depicting, the selling of a sweatshirt with the word "the monkey" on it. So, I'm not trying to say that, only black people can be, or people of color can be the only ones that have an appreciation or understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think broadly speaking, the lack of education, the lack of knowing our history, the lack of appreciating our history. And let's just think about this. The lack of empathy is what prevents people from really grasping it, because as we've talked about in other conversations, and, as I've said, there's going to be a lot of commonality and a lot of themes that intersect between these conversations and such. It is not a white person's right, in my opinion, to tell me that the Aunt Jemima depiction is not racist. It's not a white person's right to tell someone of Native American heritage that a team named such as the Washington Redskins isn't offensive or racist, So, but that's what ultimately we hear. Those are the loudest voices that get heard. Those are the people, those people representing that mindset are the ones that are making decisions. They're the ones that are determining a lot of things in our society, a lot. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know. I mean, perfect example. I mean, there's a debate here, right? There's a debate here regarding the terminology rule of thumb. I've always been grown up to understand that you just stay away from that. Don't use the terminology rule of thumb. The urban legend, whether it's true or not or whatever, ancient England, old England, a man could beat his wife as long as the stick wasn't thicker than the size of his thumb, right? And there's going to be people that debate that all day. I'm sure people who debate it may be, what's the word I'm looking for here? As a preface for the monkey wrench, for instance. So Jack Johnson is a boxer. He was a black guy, early 1900s. While he was in prison, he created a wrench. He wasn't the first one to do so, but he got a patent for it. He got a patent for the wrench after he got out of prison. And afterwards, and again, this is up for debate as well. Some people debate this issue as well. People refer to it as the monkey wrench. Because he's a black guy. And, that's something that you just kind of stay away from. You don't touch that. It's a wrench. That's what you call it. That's what it is. So, again, that's up for debate. I'm sure people who are on one side of that argument are going to say, oh, no, that's not racist. That word's been around for a long time or whatever. And then you have, other people who are like, nah, I'm not even going to even touch that. I'm not even going to even call it or refer to it as such, because that could be potentially racist. The issue is, it's not to be paralyzed. It's not to be paralyzed by, okay, well, I'm worried about every particular thing that I say or every particular thing that I do could potentially be offensive. I mean, the reality of life is you're not gonna make everyone happy. In some respects, someone can take offense from anything. Like, I have my hat on backwards right now. There's a bar a block away from me that they don't want people to have their hats on backwards when you're in there, whatever. So like there's you can find people can find fault in a lot of things, but I think it's important to understand and have that diversity, equity, and inclusive mindset, right? And that lens, like, because if you see certain things, that they're immediately racist. That they could be immediately deemed as being offensive. Something else, again, going back to not knowing what you don't know. So you all probably know about, I don't know, this is 2020. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whenever Instagram got hot, and like Snapchat got hot and stuff, planking was a thing, right? So you saw like celebrities, people were putting their babies and like planking on stuff, right? And people don't realize or understand that planking has its origins in slavery. And again, we don't talk about these things. We don't educate people. We don't, they don't know history and such. Like, if you look at any depiction of a slave ship, it was literally referred to as planking in the manner in which they were orienting the slaves in slave ships in the hull, backwards, frontwards, however the case may be. That was called planking, right? And I'm not saying that to mean that someone, this whole planking craze that popped up was a matter of like, okay, well, we're racist people, so let's just make this hot. I'm not saying that whatsoever. I'm not saying that at all. But the point that I'm making to you is it caught fire, and it was so popular and such that I'm thinking to myself when I'm watching those things, and then finally people started speaking up on it. That's when people were like, that's when people were saying, hey, that is not cool. Do you understand what you're representing, what you're doing in that manner? And once again, I think it's a matter of lack of education, lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, and the normalizing of certain things that are overtly racist that people don't know that they're racist because it's so normalized, and also because they just have a lack of knowledge. So I remember being and feeling so disappointed. I'll never forget, like, one of my favorite hotels I like to go to in Orlando is called the Grand Bohemian. And I saw Dwight Howard, this was when he was playing for the Orlando Magic, planking on like a concrete block that's in front of the Grand Bohemian Hotel or whatever. And I'm like, man, like, you're a black dude. I'm like, you're a black dude, and what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? And that, again, even some black people don't understand their heritage and their history and such, because either it wasn't told to them by their parents or they didn't learn it in formal education. So I think the bigger point that I'm making tonight, and I want to reiterate that again, isn't the fact that, in my opinion, I don't feel like, if you go and purchase Aunt Jemima, products or branded products or whatever the case may be, like, that's racist. Or if you participate in the planking craze or whatever the case may be, or whatever, like, you're a racist person or whatever. I think the point is that we are not educating people. We are not educating people, and we are not educating people about history, because I would, again, taking that Anne Frank mindset, right? Like, believing that, all people are good at heart. Like, I would like to think to myself that if people truly understood the, representations of some of those things, that they would understand. You still have those who get told, the explanation, just like Jen said last night. Google it, look things up, understand, educate yourself. I said that on the day one of this conversation series. Like, people can educate themselves. You can be educated in school, and if you have the education and knowledge yourself, you can educate others. So, even when people sometimes are presented with the facts or the feelings that are conjured up when they see images of hate or hateful imagery or racist imagery or whatever the case may be, they still refuse to understand because it doesn't relate to them. They lack empathy, or they're just racist themselves. And we know that's not gonna go away. There's gonna always be racism. There's always gonna be prejudice. But most important is that, I think that we just, as I said in one of my earlier conversations, have an understanding for our fellow man's, circumstance in their situation. There's a lot of depictions of racism throughout our society. Like, once again, we already talked about hateful imagery, some of those points that I brought up, but it's in movies too. I mean, we have movies that are just like fantasized and glamorized, like Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind, like, I don't know if people don't see or understand the racism that's portrayed in Gone with the Wind. I don't know. It's challenging for me. I think that maybe they have a different lens or perspective, or they just haven't been educated. They haven't had a conversation with a person of color, or they don't see the themes that resonate through that. And Gone with the Wind, gets beat up a lot in that regard, being, regarding, its depictions of, it's Civil War and all this other kind of stuff or whatever. But there are other films as well. Gone with the Wind is the one that comes to mind for me right now. So, I'd be curious to know, some people are really, how do I say this politely? They're really uncomfortable. They're really uncomfortable with the decision that Quaker Oats made regarding Aunt Jemima and, changing that branding. They're really uncomfortable with, the Uncle Ben's. I think Uncle Ben's is backing off of their branding as well. Miss Butterworth is backing off of their branding as well. it begs the question, what took so long? It begs the question, why now? Because these things have been getting brought up to them for, those companies and corporations for a very long time. But I think that this moment is different. This moment is different. And I think, this isn't going to be the end of it, right? This isn't going to be the last thing that happens. I mean, we are, and I'm straying a little bit off the topic of the hateful imagery situation a little bit right now, but I'm going to make another point. So, we're seeing a lot of people in this day and age who are exposing themselves for their bigoted beliefs, for their racist rhetoric, for being prejudicial as well. There was just that guy, I think the CEO of CrossFit, right? Y'all probably saw that. Someone was talking about, on Twitter how how racism is a pandemic or something. And he tweeted back saying it's Floyd 19 or something like that. Like, that's messed up. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. Like, and that's just one person. I mean, there's plenty of people who are, I'm on Twitter heavy. I'm on, social media, especially during this moment, looking up, Black Lives Matter stuff and circumstances and situations and dialogue. But I'm also here active in the Tampa community protesting as well. And, there's a bunch of people who are out there really keeping their eye to the, social media and stuff, because people are spitting a lot of rhetoric and, putting out a lot of threats, right, about people who are protesting, about people who are in support of Black Lives Matter and so on and so forth. So I'm seeing a lot of this hateful stuff myself personally, and people are losing their jobs. People are being investigated. I turned someone into the FBI 3 weeks ago here in Tampa, in the local law enforcement, because of stuff that he had online. And this isn't, to say that, people can't have their own opinions. This isn't to say that people, can't, to have, exercise their First Amendment right or whatever the case may be. But we are seeing right now that there are some people who are using this moment to really show who they are. And that being said, as well as in concert with the fact of the climate that's existing right now in our country, things like Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's, Miss Buttersworth, maybe some other brands, they're going to be rolled back, I think. They're going to be undone. Those wrongs are going to be undone, even though they're long overdue, because it's time. It's time for that. It's time for that stuff to happen. I mean, it should never existed to begin with. Characters that are demeaning an entire race of people or a particular subset of a race of people and such, things like that. So I don't know. I'd be very interested to know what people think. Drop your comments in the comments when I post this. Again, people have been shooting me messages and thoughts about the series. Share it with people so they can have a conversation about it civilly. I mean, if we can't have civil discourse, we're not going to come to an understanding of each other's beliefs, right? So, my hope is, again, that we are just, this is sparking conversation that people are able to share with each other, with people that they care about. So, that was my very, very impromptu kind of, discussion and talk about, this drama really that is, this whole Aunt Jemima situation. But let me know what you think. I want to hear about it. So hope you all have a good night, and I'll be back with you tomorrow.